welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, the man who is easily confused by foreign languages, Sean McKinda.
Namae wa Jackson Kara desu.
Exactly. We're talking some fucking anime shit this week, which means that I am under mental distress, not because it's anime, but because my brain can't comprehend two languages at the same time.
And I insist on trying out my terrible Japanese and making it worse.
It's important for you, and I respect that as someone who's actively trying to learn Japanese and trying to like internalize it so you can have conversations with other people in foreign lands and the like. So I respect it and I understand it. However, I would appreciate if you stopped delivering mental anguish unto me when during our introductory count-in you don't change languages all of a sudden and like my brain doesn't snap in twain because I cannot handle two languages.
I want everyone to know that I've officially become the guy that started adding ne to sentences because I want it to feel natural in my mouth for when I moved to Japan. So even in English sentences, when I'm like saying something, I think someone will agree with, I'll be like, yeah, I do enjoy, I do enjoy me a good hamburger, ne?
Ne?
I've become that guy. I'm officially that guy. I've emerged from my disgusting otaku cocoon.
I cannot believe I have a podcast with you.
There's so much slime on me, oh god.
As I said, we're talking about an anime movie this week, specifically Your Name, 2016's wonderful body-swapping romance set in the era of the dinosaurs. That last part was a lie, but if you've seen the movie, you'll know why.
Oh, I'm just waiting. I'm fiending to talk about that. But yes, that is the movie we're talking about this week, because I, despite being the giant weeaboo, had not seen this before, even though it was a very popular, very big movie when it came out.
Third most popular movie in Japan, third most profitable movie in Japan, behind Spirited Away, and now Demon Slayer Mugen Train, or whatever the hell that one is.
I'm very upset that as I'm moving to Japan, One Piece is finally getting usurped, because now, at least like with One Piece, I was genuinely interested in reading One Piece anyway, because, Oda's a big Dragon Ball guy, took a big inspiration from Dragon Ball, kind of in that vein, like to see how things evolve. I couldn't give less of a fuck about ever watching Demon Slayer, but now apparently I'm obligated to.
Everything I've heard about it says it's supposed to be pretty good.
When I talked to Duncan, because he's watched at least the first season, and he said it was all right, like pretty standard shonen. And it's like, I've watched a lot of standard and non-standard shonen at this point,
I mean, I don't know why you would try and get yourself through One Piece then, because after reading through 1,000 chapters, it's largely pretty standard shonen, yeah.
I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I like shonen, obviously. I'm a big Dragon Ball boy. But, like, part of the reason that I wanted to read One Piece at all was because it was, like, the numero uno, undisputed heavyweight champion of manga. And now here comes this fucking upstart Demon Slayer to kick me in the balls. Fuck you, Demon Slayer.
Well, see, if you're going to read Demon Slayer, now is the time to do it, though, because there's only, like, 200 some chapters, and that's doable in a couple days. You're not buckling up for the month-long read of 1,000 fucking chapters of One Piece.
Oh god, you're right. No.
It makes more sense to read Demon Slayer than One Piece from just a time utilitarian perspective.
Cost-benefit analysis. Yeah, you're right. Fuck, I guess I'm reading Demon Slayer. All right, we're not talking about fucking Demon Slayer One Piece. We're talking about Your Name. God damn it.
And why the fuck are we talking about Your Name, Jackson? Obviously, you haven't seen it. So what made you choose this?
Well, I chose this because I was, aware of Your Name, obviously, because I am a weeb, and it was big in the weeb world there a couple of years ago. And I knew that it was like a little romance, a little character drama with a little bit of a fantasy element. And hey, I got a book that's coming out that's not so much a romance, but it's a character drama with a fantasy element.
Jackson, it's already out at this point.
Oh my god. as this release, it is out. Kelly is Unbreakable. My story about a sad girl with superpowers trying to survive and struggle in the shittiest small town imaginable. You can buy it now on Amazon.com. Imagine that.
Hey.
But yeah, this movie, it was something that I'd wanted to see anyway, even though nobody really talks about it anymore, which I was also curious why that was. I mean, I've got a whole rant about how, like, fad-driven the anime fandom is. That's neither here nor there. But beyond that, I just wanted to watch it. Had more in common with my book than I realized, because this movie is also, at least to some degree, about a sad girl in a shitty small town who hates that shit and has a fantasy element. And is a character drama. And that is exactly my shit. So much my shit that I wrote a whole book about it. And what did I think? I made this comparison in the pre-discussion. Your Name is like comfort food. It's not junk food. It's not the sort of thing where you eat it and you feel bad about yourself afterwards, even if you're like indulging in your sin before. Nor is it like a 3-star Michelin meal that you're going to be thinking about for the rest of your life as, like, you know, one of the highlights, like something big, important, like the best meal you've ever had. It is a very comfy, very nice, very pleasant movie that you can watch and then settle in for a long nap with a good feeling. Visually stunning. I wish I had seen it in theaters for that reason. Not only are there lots of beautiful vistas, it's very animated. Even for a character drama like this, there's not like a ton of action, but there's a lot of like great shots and small animation touches. So it's wonderful visually. Definitely worth recommending on that alone. The story I'm more mixed on for many reasons. I think that it had me at the beginning. It started off really great, and towards the end, it was good. It was effective. It did what it needed to do, but I didn't feel much beyond that. That it was just nice. And it was nice. I did enjoy it. I don't regret watching it. But I felt like, move some of the pieces around, beef up some of the characters in particular. You could have had like a masterpiece. But as it is, it's just a very comfy movie. It's comfy. It's comfort food. Still worth watching if you haven't seen it, or revisiting if you have. Not like the greatest movie of all time, the next like Miyazaki or whatever the hype was. I mean, I feel like if I'd watched it at the time, because this movie is so much my shit in terms of the content, it was a couple years ago, and like I just hadn't watched particularly as much anime. Like 2016 was kind of when I was really, really getting into anime, like full swing. So I bet you I would have been really blown away. There was another show that came out during that time that has very similar content that I like more, called Erased. And I watched that first. And, the fact that I kept making those comparisons maybe led me to not enjoying the story as much. I don't know, but it's still great. It was good. It could have been good, but it was very good.
Well, I'm going to echo pretty much everything that Jackson has just said, except with the caveat that this is my second time watching this film. I originally did see this in theaters when it was coming out back in 2016. And honestly had pretty much similar feelings about it. I think it is a fine comfort food movie, but it never really landed in the way that it seemed to for so many other people. And I think a lot of it has to do with like the kind of goofy way it transitions from its second to third act, as well as kind of some of the goofy glut in the middle that makes it very much of its Japanese ilk. And obviously that's not to write off all of Japanese media. I literally just got done saying that I have read the entirety of all 1,000 chapters of One Piece, which definitely has a lot of that Japanese media glut there. But as far as the comparison to a Ghibli film, it doesn't live up to those hypes, whereas Ghibli films feel all wholesome all the time.
This has got the tropes. It's got the tropes.
It's got the tropes. It's got that, brief panty shot. It's got some nice boob grabbing because you get the body swap happening in there. And granted, there is a boob grabbing joke that is one of the funniest things in any movie ever, in my opinion. But outside of that, it is just kind of like, yeah, we get it. You switch bodies with the lady. You gotta touch your boobies. Ha ha ha. Move on. So it doesn't ever really land in that perfect Miyazaki Ghibli way. But I mean, as Jackson said, it's a great comfort food. I don't feel bad watching it. It's not one of those that I get done with like 8 different caveats to whether I would recommend it or not. No, this is if you like anime movie, this is if you want to watch it, fucking watch it. There's not really anyone I wouldn't recommend it to. If someone came up to me and said, should I watch Your Name? Yes. Is like, I don't know that I would recommend it to somebody who's not like big into anime or anything, or like if they're just like, hey, what movie should I watch? I don't know, this would be at my forefront, but it's good enough to recommend to pretty much anyone. So
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's funny that, you mentioned with like the boob grabbing jokes is that this movie, it has the tropes, but one of the things I find maybe a little frustrating is that it kind of gestures at something, it kind of gestures at something that I feel like it doesn't make good on as far as like themes. I think the boob grabbing is like part of that because you have 3 ways basically. There's like, the Ghibli, like complete wholesome romance. There's the tropes, which this is the tropes. But then you could actually make a movie that is in some way about like sexuality and people's bodies and like really deals with that and like, in like a coming of age way. Like that's perfectly fertile ground for a interesting, effective movie. And sometimes it feels like this movie's going for it and in a purposeful way. But I just don't think it gets there, partly because of the second half.
Yes, which we're going to save the second half discussion entirely for spoilers. We don't want to get into that at all because it is wild, and I honestly cannot recommend watching the movie enough just to figure out like what that transition is. It is nuts. So we'll get into that in a second here, but I do think you're entirely right that if this movie was leaning a bit more into like the understanding the other's perspective, like figuring out how puberty works as a girl versus a guy type of thing, that could be a really interesting way to take the film. And as you said, it kind of threatens to do so in a way that almost turns it into something else. And I'm going to save an in-depth discussion for that for the spoiler discussion as well. And to be fair, it's going to be a very brief discussion of it because I do not have the place to speak on it from, but I think this movie could fairly easily be read as a trans allegory. And by that I mean like a transgender allegory. But again, cisgender, don't want to read too much into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the spoilers just because I think it's fascinating to talk about is like how I picked up on it. But I'm also fully aware that this might not be a 1-to-1 reading and I might be seeing things that actual trans folks might not be like, that's not what we want to see represented. But I also know from following a lot of people on Twitter that body swapping and magical gender changing is real big in the trans community for obvious fucking reasons. So
it's hard to not draw those comparisons, especially when you're thinking about it, and especially because there's a pretty well documented crossover between the trans community and the anime fandom. And I think part of that comes with the territory of just this whole body swap thing, right? Like when you're aware of it and you're thinking about fiction through that lens, it's kind of hard to not see it. And I do think the movie is purposefully engaging with some of those themes in some parts. But anime in general, I think, also attracts a lot of the trans community because there's so much of a focus on transformation in a lot of it, even in ways that you wouldn't expect. The go-to example I can sort of think of that I know a lot of trans women, just sort of anecdotally, are pretty into Sailor Moon, and you can kind of easily see where that comes from, where even though there's not literal like trans text, as far as I know, in Sailor Moon. I'm not a big Sailor Moon guy, but even just from, a surface level, you could see how like that would speak to someone very directly. This idea that you're taking, your current dumpy old regular self and having this extremely elaborate transformation into this glorious like model of femininity that like does all this magical, wonderful shit. And so I think a lot of that in this movie, at least, I think that there's something there, and the movie knows there's something there, and it's going for it until it doesn't.
I mean, I do have to wonder how much of it is actually intentional and how much of it isn't, because I think that when you get onto that reading of it, you can start to pick up some of it. And like, there's one line that we are both dancing around that I, again, want to save for spoilers. That's kind of like the linchpin of the whole thing. But I also do just wonder how much of it is Japan likes their anime transformation stuff. Plain and simple. I mean, body swapping is a big thing in all media, and this whole movie is about the red ring of death, the red string of fate, which is, that whole romance trope of two people inextricably linked, very big in Eastern cultures, but also, I mean, it's common in all media across the board, very much so, especially like fan fiction and whatnot is a huge location for it, which was the first time I heard it back when I was editing another podcast and they were talking about fan fiction works and whatnot. So, fun fact, I actually was not aware of that the first time I watched this movie, and like the second time I watched this movie, it like opens up on this whole red string connecting these people, and I'm like, huh. Can't believe I missed that last time.
I think that specific connection, though, in a American context, I think that if you don't watch a ton of anime, or like if you're not super clued into it, I think that although that idea of like the soulmate or the fated pair is something that's really common, I think that particular phrase of like, bound by the red string or connected by the red string, I think that's very specifically I know in at least China and Japan, probably other countries as well. So I'm not terribly surprised.
As I said, it's fairly big on fan fiction forums as well, which does make a lot of sense, but I don't think it really has broken bad into the mainstream of Western audiences.
You just got like early 2010s gamer bro culture on the mind. The red ring of death, Breaking Bad.
I don't know what's happened to me. I feel like I have been diagnosed gamer here, and I'm kind of upset by it. So
my man's turning into gamer, Sean. He's evolving into his final form.
Oh no, that's never a good thing. All right. Well, do we have anything else we want to say before we dive into spoilers?
I can give my broader criticism because I want to connect it to what I said last week, because it's similar in what I think my fundamental problem with the movie is, which is less of a problem here.
I mean, and obviously this movie is very easily connectable to the Twilight series. It makes sense that this would be kind of our double feature and, in conversation with one another. And to be clear, I am half kidding, because when you actually like break down the themes and ideas behind it, there's a lot of overlap. However, if you walked up to any other person and be like, we watched Twilight and then Your Name, an anime movie and a YA vampire romance novel, they would look at you like the strangest motherfucker on planet Earth.
Pretty much the most immediate connection is as a paranormal romance. And as a paranormal romance, my problem is more or less the same. So in Twilight, you had two characters, Edward and Bella. Bella is a plank of wood, and that's fine. That's fine. You can have your audience insert character, but then you really need to make up for it with the other one. And of course, as we discussed last week, and as everybody knows by now, Edward Cullen sucks. We don't like him. And therefore, it's hard to get invested in the romance Jacob on even a surface level. What'd you say?
Don't worry about it. Just keep talking.
Okay. My problem here is similar, but it's almost like take the two positions and like kick them up a notch. And that the character that sucks I now find about as interesting as a plank of wood, and the character who filled the role of the plank of wood is now like actually an interesting character. Even though we do a lot of body swapping shenanigans, we get a lot of the movie from Mitsuha, the girl's perspective. And the movie does a really good job of making you empathize with her. It mostly follows her point of view for like the first quarter of the movie or so. You get a real sense for like what she wants, like what's bothering her in life, kind of her situation. And none of it's groundbreaking, but it's effective. And it's enough to get me invested in that character. I'm even struggling to remember his name. Is it Taki?
It's Taki, yes.
It's Taki. I keep thinking Takagi. I don't know who that is, but that's another anime character, I'm sure.
I think Mr. Takagi is the head banker that Hans Gruber shoots in the head in the beginning of the movie.
Oh.
To be fair, the only reason I know that is because there's an episode of Bob's Burgers in which Gene puts on a Die Hard the musical, and one of the lines of the song is shooting Mr. Takagi in the head. So
I was going to say that's an extremely deep cut.
Especially for us, the masters of immediately forgetting character names.
But Taki, I mean, that should tell you enough that, like, I wasn't entirely certain what his name was. I know, your name, haha. I know Mitsuha's name. I like hard to forget it because I actually am more invested in that character. But Taki, it basically begins and ends that he's a stereotypical boy. He grabs the boobas. He likes the ladies. He's awkward. He's very much like a self-insert anime protagonist, which is fine. But structurally, it gets a little weird and is a little disappointing because we spend most of the first part of the movie with the more fleshed out character. And I think that if Taki was as fleshed out as Mitsuha was, even like if you take the same idea for the story, I think that it would have a greater impact, and that like I'm really happy to see these two characters that I'm invested in fall in love or do whatever, as opposed to having one character that I'm pretty invested in and another that I'm just like, oh, that's nice. It's not like I dislike him, but I just don't get a read on him. He's just a guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's a nice enough dude, but he is just nice enough to become the most milquetoast motherfucker on the face of the earth.
Extremely light novel protagonist boy, except even most of those guys are kind of like shitty and have, something going on. He's a nice, awkward little man who likes his boobas, and that describes about like 30 million anime boys.
Yo, wait, hang on. All right, here's a fun question for you, okay? We can talk about Mitsuha's character development because, she is anxious about going to the shrine. She doesn't like necessarily how she relates to everyone else in the town. She wants to leave the small town. She doesn't like that she's a shrine maiden. There's a lot of, like, internal dialogue and strife between her. Tell me something about Taki and not that he has a job.
Ooh.
Oh, I can. Okay. He wants to be an architect, and we know this because he has a poster on his wall that just says architecture.
Honestly, I didn't even notice that. I'm like, he can draw that town really well.
Yes, because he wants to be an architect. That's why.
Well, I mean, that's something, I guess.
It's never really expressed. It's very much background information.
And it's not something that's like, I want to be an architect, but like, oh, this is my dream, but I can't afford to go to school to be an architect, so I got to work this shitty job. Like, it's just, I want to be an architect.
Or even I want to be an architect because it's just, I want to be an architect. It seems cool.
I want to be an architect so I can draw a picture of the town because that's going to be important to the plot later.
And how does this create conflict? It doesn't? Oh.
He has a hard time getting a job.
He does. Why?
I don't know, because he's not as good as his boys who are not. And, that's the other thing too, is that like Taki's got his boys and his senpai, and Mitsuha's got her little friends.
And I can tell you one of their names is Tessie. I can tell you one of her friends' names. And
it's Tessie and Sayaka. I remember them both. the other guys are just the boys.
Yep.
Amazon's The Boys. I've heard that's a good show. I didn't want to believe it because it was called The Boys. That's really silly.
I've watched the first season and I can confirm it completely whips ass. It's helped by the fact that the original novel or the original comic series was written by Garth Ennis, one of the kind of forefront authors around the time of Neil Gaiman's rise and Frank Miller back when he wrote good comics and the time of people doing weird experimental things. Alan Moore, all around that era.
Yeah.
And Garth Ennis absolutely fucking rules, at least the shows that it's based on. The first season of Preacher still might be one of my all-time favorite seasons of television. And The Boys is pretty fucking good as well. I need to watch season 2, but I can confirm, silly name aside, is pretty damn good.
I gotta watch The Boys. I feel like I would like The Boys. This
think
isn't
you
about
would.
The Boys, though.
Well, it is, but not those boys.
Yeah, TLDR, Taki's bland. There's some weird POV stuff going on. A lot of it has to do with spoilers that I'm just fiending to talk about. Do you have anything else?
No, let's get into spoilers. But before we do, as always, if you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Tell a friend about us. It's the only way we grow. Follow us on Twitter at BADHcast. Buy Jackson's book.
It's Kelly is Unbreakable. If you like your name or interested in your name, I feel like you'll probably have a good time with that too. You can buy it on Amazon, both in print and ebook editions.
And next week, we talked about watching The Social Network a few weeks back. Fuck it, let's watch The Social Network next week. Let's do it. Be legends. Fuck yeah.
I am still interested in rewatching The Social Network, so I'm totally fine now that we've gotten this brief period of paranormal romance shilling over with. God, I chose 2 movies that are paranormal romances. My book isn't really romance.
It's not at all. I've read a third of it so far. I probably have it done by the time this episode goes live. It's not romance at all.
Well, that's neither here nor there, but it is about sad teens in small town.
Go read it. It's pretty good. Spoilers?
Spoilers. Can I describe where the movie changes? Please.
Well, only if you get on the floor and walk the dinosaur.
My girl Mitsuha gets taken out like the fucking Cretaceous period. Holy shit. Oh my God. So for those of you who don't know and don't understand what we're getting at, halfway through the movie, Mitsuha gets killed by a fucking meteor.
That's not an exaggeration. It is literally a meteor that just destroys her.
I want to bring this part with an anecdote, because here's some beating a dead horse lore, is that all the way back at the beginning when we started the show, Sean had asked me if I'd seen this movie, and I had said, I've been really interested. I've heard good things, but I just haven't got around to it. That was when I started grad school. I didn't have anyone to go to the theater with. I don't even know if it was playing in the theater in fucking Marquette. That was a problem we used to have.
Oh yeah, that was a problem.
That stuck with me though, because that was when we were focused more explicitly around talking about death in movies. So I didn't forget that you had brought that up to me.
Welcome, new listeners. Originally, this was a podcast about death in movies. It was originally beating a dead horse because it was a clever play on words. We haven't done that in 3.5 years. Don't worry,
Thank
you're
God.
not missing anything.
But so I kept that in the back of my mind, and given what it was, I knew there was like a paranormal element, but I kind of assumed this was like the Pancreas movie, like one of them would get sick or get stabbed, I guess. Spoilers for the Pancreas movie. Who cares? This movie's better than the Pancreas movie. But that, so I had that in the back of my mind. I'm like, oh, is one of them gonna die? Like, what's going on here? Mitsuha's got like a dead mom, and that affects like her backstory. Maybe he's talking about that. So I had it in the back of my mind, and then when she's having her moment and there's that beautiful like sweeping shot of the comet, and then it zooms in on her face as she's like taking it all in, and it slowly turns to one of horror. My face turned to one of horror, because I'm like, oh no, this sweet little movie, the sweet little slice of life movie is about to become completely fucked, because my girl's gonna get killed by a fucking meteor. And that's exactly what happened.
Yes, and that is kind of the big caveat of this movie, because It is fucking insane. It is so goddamn wild. And like, it's a clever idea. Like the way that the movie executes on it, like trying to find this town and just learning that it got wiped off the map 3 years ago is a neat concept for like trying to find a romance and everything. But like getting Final Fantasy Tiamat summoned is insane.
Yeah, literally Sephiroth grabbing the black materia so he can enter the life stream in that little Hokkaido town. Oh my god.
The comet's literally called Tiamat as well. Like literally a Final Fantasy summon. And yes, I know that Tiamat's not from Final Fantasy, but it exists with it. Don't at me.
So here's my problem with the meteor, and it's less of a problem. I think fundamentally. Oh wait, what?
Boomba. Ooh. Sorry, I'm doing the Walk the Dinosaur song.
That didn't help when I had that thought. I literally, like, when I said she gets taken out like the fucking Cretaceous period, that's not a bit. That was literally like what I thought, and I couldn't let it go when I had that realization. So that never stopped being funny. But I get what they're going for. And what they're going for is, of course, like the red string of fate, part of this grand sweeping, across time, sort of like destined lovers sort of thing. And that's all fine and dandy. I don't mind that. I don't know, like maybe it could have been foreshadowed more. Maybe it like...
On a rewatch, it is fairly heavily foreshadowed for what it's worth.
I know they bring up the comet a lot, but I kind of... I think, are they doing... I don't know. I guess you'd know better on the rewatch. But because what I had sort of thought about the comet was like, oh, the body switching has something to do with the comet. And I wonder if that's what they were assuming you would assume.
No, for sure. It's definitely trying to play with that expectation. But like when Taki goes on the date with the senpai, I cannot remember her name. Good job writing Taki and his friends. They go to an art museum where he sees, where Mitsuha's town is from, and it's called like nostalgia, implying things that are gone and forgotten. And there's like a lot of little nuances like that kind of hint at the fact that it's gone. Like all the photos there are in black and white, and there's some neat little stuff like that. But I mean, for the most part, yeah, it is, I think, just supposed to be like, oh, it's the comet that's causing this. And, that last night something wild's going to happen as a result. But just kidding, we're dropping a comet on Mitsuha's head. Have fun.
On the one hand, I get it, because I'm pretty sure Makoto Shinkai's even said that part of the inspiration was like the Fukushima earthquake disaster. So obviously Japan as a country is no stranger to like horrific disasters of some sort on like an apocalyptic level, even just like on a town. So perhaps it doesn't play as silly, to a Japanese audience. I don't know. I don't know, but something about it is just very silly, and I think it doesn't help. It's not like so silly the movie can't recover from it. Like I still enjoyed it, but it's definitely where I think I settled into like, oh, the movie was kind of going for some themes. I feel like I'm at that point, I just kind of settled into like, this is a nice little fantasy story at that point.
Yeah, because at that point it does also transition into this like essentially a heist movie, honestly, in which the goal is to get everybody to escape from the town. And like they put together this whole plan, like Ocean's 11 style, to trick everyone into leaving the town so that nobody gets, meteored throughout that night. Which, I mean, okay, just to Jackson's point as well, like there is something to be said for like an argument that it's also like nuclear related, a bomb drop. There's, some comparisons to be made in that way. And we're obviously making very light of it because in the literal text of the movie, a meteor is dropped on this girl's head. But like, yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that like we are kind of making light of this. And I think that there is a heavier element to it that it does get lost in some regards on American audiences not having suffered that traumatic event.
Yeah, and again, I just genuinely don't know, because I'd be curious that like even if you're like if just your average like Japanese Joe, average Akira go into the movie, like if they would also be like caught off guard in kind of that funny way, like what the fuck just happened? Because it's very sudden, in a way that I think is intentional, but I don't know if it works 100%. It's weird. I kind of respect it for being weird, but yeah, it does play into my central problem, which is to kind of say what I think is sort of weird structurally about the movie. And I see what they're going for on this too, but like Howie Ratner, I disagree. I disagree with their intention on this. So, you know, we get so much of Mitsuha for the first part of the movie, I think, to really make you care about her when she dies. And, you know, to really bring that audience desire, really play into the role, kind of do a bait and switch, like, just kidding, we're actually going to follow the implied, like, male gazy, you know, shonen boy the whole time, and your emotions are lined up with his because you're sad that Mitsuha's gone and you want to follow him. And I can't say it doesn't work in that regard, but it's just a little strange and a little disappointing that because we leaned so much into her character and got so much and had all these threads that get kind of abandoned so we can do a time travel Ocean's 11 heist, then we spend basically the rest of the movie, or the vast majority of the movie at least, from Taki's perspective, whether he's in Mitsuha's body or not. And of course, like as we said, he's just not that interesting of a character. He's just bland. And that's very disappointing. And at that point, it's like the movie starts as a very character-driven movie with Mitsuha and then becomes a very plot-driven movie. And I can't say that it's not a fun plot, because it is. I did have fun with it. But I don't know. I really liked a lot of the character stuff that was going on.
It definitely loses all of that for probably... So I think it kind of comes back for a hot second there. But basically, Mitsuha gets meteored, and then it kind of explores Taki, trying to find the town for a little bit, and then basically living his life before he decides I need to go and try and basically force myself to just body switch with Mitsuha again. And when this happens, I'm like, oh man, that's kind of a bummer. I at the time didn't remember how the movie ended. And I'm like, if Taki just like solves the problem for Mitsuha, like that kind of just fucking sucks, huh?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, while Taki is in Mitsuha's body is where the movie really takes a dive. But eventually they both meet up again on the brim of the crater impact where the shrine is, and that's a nice moment. There's some like interesting character work done there. It's cute when he writes I love you instead of his name on her hand. I thought that was adorable, made me feel things. But then it goes right back to just kidding. We need to finish the fucking Ocean's 11 hijinks and get everybody out of there. And then it ends before we even find out whether it's a success or not. And we cut back to Taki.
Yeah, I didn't love the way that like it felt almost like they were trying to portray it like it wasn't successful. Like it almost felt a little like it cheated to me, because the last that we see,
it definitely cheated. It don't even. Yeah. It felt so much like a cheat, because you're right. The last scene is her running into her dad's office, who already outwardly rejected this plan, shut off everything that they had worked for, and he's like, we're not doing this. Who are you? What are you doing here? And then he recognizes that it is, in fact, Mitsuha, not Taki in that body. And it's like, wait, it's you. And then it cuts out. And, you know, at this point, you're pretty much assuming that it's too late. The meteor has already splintered and half of it's falling to Earth. And your question is, how much time do they actually have? Probably not much, huh? Nope, apparently it's enough to basically restructure everything as a test of the security announcement. Everybody get to the school. I don't know. Everyone was fine. It's cheating.
It feels very Frieza, this planet's gonna blow in 5 minutes to me. But yeah, I mean, that's whatever. I mean, there's a lot of little things about the movie that you can nitpick with that. And I'm not super interested in doing that, because I think
that's worth mentioning in and of itself, just because that is such like a weird, big logic leap that it's hard not to pick up on. Like we talked about,
it happens a couple of times, the couple other things too.
Yeah, but I mean, like a lot of the other stuff, there's a lot of like little idiosyncrasies that, you know, it'd be really easy to nitpick on, like how would they not know that it's 3 years apart, blah 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 blah. Yeah. And like that, I think that's the stuff that we especially don't want to really harp on, because like I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with noticing that, but I think that if you are engaging with the movie on the level it wants you to, it's not hard to just kind of turn your brain off and not worry about that as much, and more so focus on what the story of the movie is trying to tell. I just think it's this final moment that feels like it's going for some dumb shock value for the sake of shock value rather than any narrative beat that it really suffers.
Yeah, because it's also the climax too. Like, you want your
Exactly.
climax to be satisfying. Yeah, for sure. And that's what really bothered me, because the other one that I'm thinking of, like, again, we at Beating a Dead Horse like try to actively not be the CinemaSins guys, like, and feed into that kind of culture. But there are times where those sort of things like do kind of take me out of the movie, and mostly it's when like I feel like if we had acknowledged something, we could do something narratively. Because the other moment for me was when Mitsuha decides to take the train to Tokyo and meet Taki and try and like actually find him. And, you know, he doesn't know her because time travel shenanigans, he hasn't met her yet. But they're specifically high schoolers. And like when I was seeing that and Taki just looks like himself 3 years later, 3 years is a big difference. That's like literally a middle schooler versus a high schooler. Like Taki would be looking and acting very different. And that's not necessarily a problem, but I felt like you could have made a thing out of that. Like that, like she didn't understand, like, wait, this isn't the guy that I know. Like, am I crazy? Like, you know, what, you know, expectations not meeting with reality. Like, it could have had some implications of the character, but it felt like Taki looked exactly like he did 3 years later because we can't have Mitsuha realizing that there's time travel shenanigans yet.
But like, there's no reason why she really shouldn't have it. Although, okay, yeah, I suppose technically that was a day before the meteor, like in canon. But for us, like, it feels like she should have been allowed to realize that, because for us as the audience, we are already aware of this happening when it is revealed to us. Like, it makes sense why. I don't know. I think it was a poor decision from a narrative standpoint across the board, honestly, because I think you're entirely right that had he been a kid, it might have been a little bit more interesting discussion, and her realizing that, oh shit, there's a weird time thing happening here. We can work out that. I don't know. I don't want to necessarily harp on it too much because it is what it is, but yeah, it's definitely worth mentioning.
No, because I guess the reason why like it stood out to me is that there's a lot of different ways you could play that, and the way that it plays, like, there are parts of the movie that feel like it cheats, and I'm glad that you've indicated me on the like climax. I kind of hedged there because you're the one who rewatched it, but yeah, like, you know, there are a couple other places that I think, and especially like in those big emotional moments, when it cheats a little bit, it's like, oh man. You know,
we've called movies vibe movies in the past, where like potentially the narrative or themes or other such like core elements of the movie don't work, but it's a good movie anyway. And I would call this exactly that, where like it has some missteps, some mistakes, but it is a good enough vibe that it's worth watching anyway.
It is a very good vibe. I love this movie's vibe, and that actually reminds me of one thing that I really wanted to praise, because I know that how shocking Jackson's been harping on like criticisms, you know, what a shock, truly. But one thing I really, 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 really loved in this movie, I love the sequence where Taki actually like goes to the shrine and like goes back in time. Like, I'm not, you know me, like, I'm a godless heathen. I've made that clear on the show many a time. I tend to not be super invested in the spiritual angle on a lot of things, but like just visually and the way like it plays into that kind of like broader romanticism and that vibe, like him reaching out and like, you know, drinking the fucking sake and the life tree and, you know, kind of experiencing her like whole life at once. That was a really, really great sequence. And I think but there's enough moments like that in terms of presenting it not just narratively but as well as visually, that make the movie a great vibe and still make it worth watching.
For sure. Do you mind if I kind of really quickly dive into this trans allegory thing that I've been kind of hinting at here?
Please do.
I want to keep this short. I want to keep this brief. I just want to mention it a little bit because I think it's a fascinating read of the movie, and it is still being written about by actual trans folks and not me. And I'm going to post links to articles in the description notes of this episode for people who are actually curious about diving further into it. But I think it's worth at least putting out there as something that other people might want to look into. But again, cis, don't have that reference point in my life, don't want to explore too much on it. But basically, the linchpin of this whole thing really boils down to the fact that Mitsuha at one point wishes not to live in Tokyo, but next time she is reborn to be a boy in Tokyo. And that is something that permeates basically the rest of the movie. She talks about how as she's setting Taki up with dates with his senpai coworker, that she wishes she was the one on the date, and she's upset that she doesn't get to be Taki for this moment. There's a moment where when she doesn't get to go on this date, she cuts her hair super short, which in some cases, oh, it's a bad breakup. What's wrong with this person? All that nonsense. But I think it's also equally readable as, seeking to become more masculine in that way. And I think that's interesting in its own right. Again, that could be way off base, but that was kind of the vibe that I was picking up on it. And beyond that, I think that one of the most compelling scenes for this, and the scene that I really, really like, is that as Taki is wandering around Tokyo trying to figure out, what am I searching for? Is it a person? Is it a place? Like, what is missing in my life? He is on the train and looking at his reflection, and another train car comes up and lines up with them, and it's Mitsuha, and like they both recognize each other. It's like, that's it. That's who I want to be. Like, that's who I want to be. That's what I want. I've been looking for a person, and that's the whole thing, is that they've been looking for a person. And every time they pass, there's like a little bell of recognition, and it's almost like there's very much an easy reading of this where each passing moment is like that's it. That's who I want to be. And like, especially if you read this almost as a more, Mitsuha is a metaphorical person, a figment of Taki's mind, a recognition of like, oh, wait, that was a woman that I feel like I've, been in, not in a sexual way, but like embodied. And like that final moment of him asking her, do I know you? What is your name? Is kind of like a moment of self-recognition in this person. Again, I might be entirely misreading everything about this movie, and if I am, I very much apologize. I'm going to link people who have spoken better about this and have a more lived experience of it, but I do think that a trans reading of this movie is incredibly viable and a very fascinating read on the film.
No, I think that there has to have been, it may not have been 100% like intentional, but I agree. I picked up on a lot of those same vibes. I think that line, the purposefulness, like she could have very easily just said like, I wish I were someone else, or I wish I was born in Tokyo. I want to be out of here. The fact that she says, I wish I was a boy in Tokyo, that, I've written a book. You tend to think about your character's word choice pretty carefully. At least I do. And I don't always get it right. No writer always gets it right. But I don't know. I feel like that's something that at least would have crossed... is Shinkai the writer? I think he might be. But regardless, it would have crossed the writer's mind at some point, I think.
I mean, alternatively, it could also just be the writer being clever, like, aha, this is some clever foreshadowing right here. I'll tell you what. And then, oops. All transgender metaphors.
Well, because I do think there are other more explicit moments that are like, I guess, if not specifically trans, like under that broader umbrella of LGBT plus gestures of like when Taki is in Mitsuha's body, she's suddenly very popular with girls in like an explicitly romantic way. Mitsuha wants to go on the date. Like there's definitely... There's some sort of vibe there, I think. And I don't think it was accidental 100%. But I also don't think it's fully made good on either, because a meteor happens and everybody walks a dinosaur.
Yes, that is kind of the big caveat to everything that we talk about, is that in the middle of it, there is a meteor, which has its own metaphors in Japan's culture and everything else. But it kind of interrupts the themes that we're interested in, because then, oh, just kidding, we can't talk about that right now. We need to go have a romp and pretend that we're George Clooney in the Ocean's movies. go knock yourselves out. It's fine. It's fine. Also, to be fair, there is a little bit more foreshadowing of it because you can always see the red piece of the meteor that breaks off every time that they show the meteor in the past or future. Like whenever they show the meteor, you can see it there. So like if you know it's coming, there's a lot of foreshadowing for it.
Well, I like that. I mean, the girl gets taken out like the fucking Cretaceous period, dude. What do you want me to say?
No, you're entirely right. I'm just saying, like, there is on a second watch a decent amount of foreshadowing for what happened there. But
no, I appreciate that. I do. I really do. It's just very, very shocking the first time. Even when you said, even when like I had sort of picked up that like one of these motherfuckers was gonna die. Again, I assumed it was gonna be like that Pancreas movie. Mm-hmm. Not like this.
No, and not even in the middle of the movie either. Like it is about the halfway point that, you know, pancaked by jump truck driver. What do you want?
Oh, Lordy.
Do you have anything else to say before we wrap this up?
I think we're good. I think that was a fine discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, dear listener. I hope you enjoyed it so much that you're like, I want to support everything these gentlemen do. And so you go and you purchase Kelly is Unbreakable, my novel, Jackson Keller's novel. Does Kelly get killed by a meteor? You're going to have to fucking buy the book to find out, aren't you?
And you really should. It's available now on Amazon.com. It's coming to e-readers soon. And it's great. Go fucking support Jackson. He absolutely deserves it. He's a wonderful author and a wonderful writer. So please go buy his book.
Aw, thanks, pal.
If you want to support me, you can follow me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda.
Oh.
Do you want to plug your Twitter or anything?
I didn't know if we were doing a bit like letting that sit there. Yeah, I'll plug my Twitter. You can make that pause as long or short as you want in editing. You can also follow me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. Spoiler alert: there's going to be a lot of book shilling, but you know we might make some Bug Snacks tweets every now and then to liven things up. Oh, I guess I do Twitch as well. Jackson J. Keller. That's a thing.
If you want to follow the podcast, that's at BADH_cast on Twitter. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. It is currently paused. Don't know what that means, but you can go look at it if you really want to. As always, thanks to those that have used our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're open by you. Go check them out however you can. Buy the music, stream the music, support their music however you want to. They're on Bandcamp, all those good music buying places. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button up in the corner that you can go click on. But while you're there, you should absolutely read the wonderful writing that everyone over there is doing. They're a bunch of really talented people writing a lot of really talented pieces. Go check it out. Next week, as I said, we're going to be talking about The Social Network finally. So stick around for that.
Finally, he's here for you. It's the last member of Zuckerberg's crew.
Bye. Jackson's book on Amazon.com.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go